and this is the day we read from a paranormal themed book. Sometimes the stories are true, sometimes they're not. But today's topic is true Irish ghost stories. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Sunday. How's everybody doing? Everybody have a good weekend? It is pouring rain outside. It is windy. It is nasty. It is nasty. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so, maybe longer. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based in Sacramento, California. We're up and down the state. We have 45, see what I mean? 45 members up and down the state of California, which means if you think you have a paranormal need, we can help you out with that. All you got to do is get a hold of us. All the various apps you can find us on, whether it's TikTok, Clapper, YouTube, and all those other apps. I want to thank everybody for coming today. Sorry I'm late. The power went out about 2 minutes before I was going to start the show. So I had to reboot everything. So just to let you guys know, if you lose me, you lose me. Okay? You probably won't lose me on the other two apps. Maybe not. We'll see. But you never know. You never know, because I have a totally different internet service for my cell phone, and sometimes that doesn't kick in either. So just letting you guys know. And I have 2 readings scheduled for this evening, and another, just to let you know, is I probably will be canceling those until another day because the weather is so bad right now. It's just so unpredictable. So it's been crazy off and on all day. Thank you for the rose. So just to let you know, over here on the Clock app, I do have a goal of 10 meerkats. If you could help me out with that, that would be great. If not, Jennifer, hello Jennifer. Good to see you, Jennifer. If not, then that's fine too. Just know that, just like, follow, and share. That's all I ask. Like, follow, and share. Thank you for the team, man. Thank you for the team. I can't answer any questions for you today. I will not be doing any readings today. So if you do give me any gifts, I should have a moderator sitting in there over on the Clock app, and they will thank you for me because I'll be reading. Same thing over here on the C app. I will, there should be a moderator maybe over there. I don't know. But I'm going to thank you guys ahead of time if you guys should gift, because as I said, I can't. First off, I can't see the screens. Secondly, I can't stop in the middle of reading the book. Okay, so we're well into this book. We're not even halfway through yet, and we had to stop last week mid-chapter because the chapter was so long. But I made sure I stopped in a place where we could start off like with a new haunting. Okay, and these are true Irish ghost stories. Hello, Marisa. How you doing? How's it going, everybody? And I'm trying out my new pad for my chair, too. I have it over in my other studio, and I wanted to try it out in here so I'd be a little higher. And I am a little higher. Usually my chin's further down, so I don't look like an elf when I'm doing stuff in here. So anyway, welcome, and we'll get into this. I'm going to read, hopefully, for about an hour, but like what happened last week was that I tried to do the hour, flipped on the next chapter, and the next chapter kept going and going and going and going. So we ended up stopping after about an hour and a half. So like I said, hour and a half, and that's going to be it for today. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you. At some point, I will take you guys on a tour of my setup and how I designed it and how it was. I'll just tell you, it was cheap. I designed it cheaply. I majored in this stuff in college and learned how to do all this. As far as sound goes, I can go out and do concerts and stuff like that. So I designed a recording studio in here, and I did it on the cheap, and I'm going to show you guys how I did it. Really cheap. Okay, let's get into True Irish Ghost Stories, and like I said, hopefully we go an hour, may go longer, so grab yourself some hot cocoa, curl up, cuddle up, and enjoy. And again, I see the Tiny Diny, thank you. I won't be able to thank you guys for gifts, just know that Kathy's probably over there. Kathy's checking it out. So whoever's in there as a moderator, Perfume. Whoever's in there as a moderator can thank you guys for me. Thank you so much. So here we go. True Irish Ghost Stories. I had to switch pages. Really? Okay, here we go. K Castle is a handsome blending of ancient... what time is it anyway? Let's get a good start on this. Okay, 5:16. Okay, here we go. Gotta know what time it is, right? Okay. K Castle is a handsome blending of ancient castle and modern dwelling house. Picturesquely situated among trees, while the steep glen mentioned below runs close beside it, it has a reputation of being haunted. But, as usual, it's difficult to get information. One gentleman, to whom we wrote, stated that he never saw or heard anything worse than a bat. On the other hand, a lady, who resided there a good many years ago, gives the following account of her extraordinary experiences therein. Dear Mr. Seymour, I enclose some account of our experiences in K Castle. It's K. Castle. It would be better not to mention names, as the people occupying it have told me they're afraid of their servants hearing anything, and consequently giving notice. They themselves hear voices often, but, like me, they do not mind. When first we went there, we heard people talking, but on looking everywhere, we could find no one. Then, on some nights, we heard fighting in the glen beside the house. Oh, by the way, if you hear noises in here, my dog isn't here with me, so she might come up and try to visit during the show and other stuff like that. Also, this was written in the late 1800s, early 1900s, so I'm going to do my best to clean up the language in here for some of the stuff, for some of the stuff that's happened to these ghostly figures. But please don't turn me if I roll over something. Don't turn me into the internet police, okay? Don't turn me into the internet police because I'm doing my best, okay? Because their stuff isn't what our versions would be nowadays. Also, these books are copyright free via Project Gutenberg. Okay, then on some nights we heard fighting in the glen beside the house. We could hear voices raised in anger and the clash of steel. No person would venture there after dusk. One night, I was sitting talking with my governess. I got up, said goodnight, and opened the door which was on top of the back staircase. As I did so, I heard someone, a woman, come slowly upstairs, walk past us to a window at the end of the landing, and then with a shriek fall heavily. As she passed, it was bitterly cold, and I drew back into the room, but did not say anything, as it might frighten the governess. She asked me what was the matter, as I looked so white. Without answering, I pushed her into her room and then searched the house, but with no results. Another night, I was sleeping with my little girl. I awoke and saw a girl with long, fair hair standing at the fireplace, one hand at her side, the other on the chimney piece. Thinking at first it was my little girl, I felt on the pillow to see if she were gone. But she was fast asleep. There was no fire or light of any kind in the room. Some time afterwards, a friend was sleeping there, and she told me that she was pushed out of the bed for the whole night. The two gentlemen to whom I had mentioned this came over, thinking they would find the cause. In the morning, when they came down, they asked for the carriage to take them to the next train, but would not tell what they had heard or seen. Another person, who came to visit her sister, who was looking after the house before we went in, slept in this room, and in the morning, she said she must go back that day. She also would give no information. On walking down the corridor, I have heard a door open, a footstep cross before me, and go into another room. Both doors being closed at the time, an old cook I had told that when she went into the old cook I had told me that when she had gone to the hall that morning, a gentleman would come down the front stairs, take a plume hat off the stand, and vanish through the hall door. This she saw nearly every morning. She also said that a girl often came into her bedroom and put her hand on her, the cook's face, and when she would push her away, she would hear a girl's voice say, "Oh, don't," 3 times. I've often heard voices in the drawing room, which decidedly sounded as if an old gentleman and a girl were talking. Noises like furniture being moved were frequently heard at night, and strangers staying with us have often asked why the servants turned out the rooms underneath them at such an unusual hour. The front doorbell sometimes rang, and I have gone down but found no one. Yours sincerely, F.T. Kilman Castle, in the heart of Ireland, the name is obviously a pseudonym, has been described as perhaps the worst haunted mansion in the British Isles. That it deserves this doubtful recommendation, we cannot say. But at all events, the ordinary reader will be prepared to admit that it contains sufficient ghosts to satisfy the most greedy ghost hunter. A couple of months ago, the present writer paid a visit to this castle and was shown all over it one morning by the mistress of the house, who, under the name Nom de Plume of Andrew Mary, has published novels dealing with Irish life, and also has contributed articles to the ghostly phenomena of her house to the Occult Review. Dates December 1908 and January 1909. The place itself is a grim gray bear building. The central portion, in which is the entrance hall, is a square castle of the usual type. It is built on a rock, and a slight batter from base to summit gives an added appearance of strength and solidity. On either side of the castle are more modern wings, one of which terminates in what is known as the priest's house. Now, to the ghosts. The top story of the central tower is a large, well-lighted apartment called the chapel, having evidently served that purpose in times past. At one end is what is said to be an oubliette, now almost filled up. Occasionally, in the evenings, people walking along the roads or in the fields see the windows of this chapel lighted up for a few seconds as if many lamps were suddenly brought into it. This is certainly not due to the servants. From our experience, we can testify that it is the last place on earth that a domestic would enter after dark. It is also said that a treasure is buried somewhere in and around the castle. The legend runs that an ancestor was about to be taken to Dublin on a charge of rebellion, and, fearing he would never return, made the best of the time left to him by burying somewhere a crock full of gold and jewels. Contrary to expectation, he did return, but his long confinement had turned his brain, and he could never remember the spot where he had deposited his treasure years before. Some time ago, a lady, a Miss B, who was decidedly psychic, was invited to Kilman Castle in the hope that she would be able to locate the whereabouts of this treasure. In this respect, she failed, unfortunately, but gave, nevertheless, a curious example of her power. As she walked through the hall with her hostess, she suddenly laid her hand upon the bare stone wall and remarked, "There's something uncanny here, but I don't know what it is." In that very spot, some time previously, 2 skeletons had been discovered, walled up. The sequel to this is curious. Sometime after Miss B was either trying automatic writing, or else was at a stance, the dog's behind me, we forget which, when a message came to her from the unseen, stating, sorry about that, stating that the treasure at Kilman Castle was concealed in the chapel under the tessellated pavement near the altar. But the spirit was either a lying spirit or else a most impish one, for there is no trace of an altar, and it is impossible to say, from the style of the room, where it stood, while the tessellated pavement, if it exists, is so covered with the debris of the former roof that it would be almost impossible to have it thoroughly cleared. There is as well a miscellaneous assortment of ghosts. A monk with tonsure and cowl walks in at one window of the priest's house and out another. There's also a little old man dressed in the antique garb of a green cutaway coat, knee breeches, and buckled shoes. He is sometimes accompanied by an old lady in similar old-fashioned costume. Another ghost has a penchant for lying on the bed beside its lawful and earthly occupant. Nothing is seen, but a great weight is felt, and a consequent deep impression made on the bedclothes. The lady of the house states that she has a number of letters from friends, in which they relate the supernatural experiences that they have while staying at the castle. Let's see where she's at. Oh, she's in her spot. Okay, here we go. In one of these, the writer, a gentleman, was awakened one night by an extraordinary feeling of intense cold at his heart. He then saw in front of him a tall female figure, clothed from head to foot in red, and with its right hand raised menacingly in the air. The light which illuminated the figure was from within. He lit a match and sprang out of bed, but the room was empty. He went back to bed and saw nothing more that night, except that several times the same cold feeling gripped his heart, though to the touch of the flesh was quite warm. But all the ghosts in that well-haunted house, the most unpleasant is that inexplicable thing that is usually called it. The lady of the house described to the present writer her personal experience of this phantom. High up around one side of the hall runs a gallery which connects with some of the bedrooms. One evening she was in this gallery, leaning on the balustrade and looking down into the hall. Suddenly she felt 2 hands laid on her shoulders. She turned round sharply and saw it standing close beside her. She described it as being human in shape and about 4 feet high. The eyes were like two black holes in the face, and the whole figure seemed as if it were made of gray cotton wool, while it was accompanied by a most appalling stench, such as would come from a decaying human body. The lady got a shock from which she did not recover for a long time. Okay, Chapter 4, Poltergeists. Pretty sure I know where she's at. Poltergeist is the term assigned to those apparently meaningless noises and movements of objects of which we from time to time hear accounts. The word is, of course, German, and may be translated as to boisterous ghost. A poltergeist is seldom or never seen, but presents itself by moving furniture and other objects about in an extraordinary manner, often contrary to the laws of gravitation. Sorry, I keep looking. There we go. Hang on. I keep losing my place. Oh, there it is. Sometimes footsteps are heard. Sorry about that. But nothing is visible. While at other times vigorous rappings will be heard either on the walls or floor of a room. And in the manner in which the raps are given, a poltergeist has often showed itself as having a close connection with the physical phenomena of spiritualism. For cases have occurred in which a poltergeist has given the exact number of raps mentally asked for by some person present. Another point that is worthy of note is the fact that the hauntings of a poltergeist are generally attached to a certain individual in a certain spot, and thus differ from the operations of an ordinary ghost. The two following incidents related in this chapter are taken from a paper read by Professor Barrett, FRS, before the Society for Cyclical Research. In the case of the first anecdote, he made every possible inquiry into the facts set forth, short of actually being an eyewitness of the phenomena. In the case of the second, he made personal investigation and he himself saw the whole of the incidents related. There is, therefore, very little room to doubt the genuineness of either story. Footnote, Proceedings, August 1911. In the year 1910, in a certain house in Court Street, Enniscorthy, there lived a boring man named Redmond. His wife took in boarders to supplement her husband's wages, and, at the time to which we refer, there were 3 men boarding with her who slept in one room above the kitchen. The house consisted of 5 rooms, 2 on the ground floor, which one was a shop, and the other the kitchen. The 2 other rooms upstairs were occupied by the Redmonds and their servant respectively. The bedroom in which the boarders slept was large and contained 2 beds, one at each end of the room, 2 men sleeping in one of them. John Randall and George Sinnott were the names of the 2, but the name of the third lodger is not known. He seems to have left the Redmonds very shortly after the disturbances commenced. It was on July 4th, 1910, that John Randall, who was a carpenter by trade, went to live at Enniscorthy and took rooms with the Redmonds. In a signed statement, now in possession of Professor Barrett, he tells a graphic tale of what occurred each night during the 3 weeks he lodged in the house. And as a result of the poltergeist's attentions, he lost 3/4 of a stone in weight. It was on the night of Thursday, July 7th, that the first incident occurred, when the bedclothes were gently pulled off his bed. Of course, he naturally thought it was a joke, and shouted to his companions to stop, as no one could explain what was happening. A match was struck, and the bedclothes were found to be at the window, from which the other bed, a large piece of furniture which was ordinarily took 2 people to move, had been rolled just when the clothes had been taken off. Randall's bed. Things were put straight and the light blown out, but Randall's account goes on to say, it wasn't long until we heard some hammering in the room, tap, tap, tap like. This lasted for a few minutes, getting quicker and quicker. When it got very quick, their bed started to move out across the room. We then struck a match and got the lamp. We searched the room thoroughly and could find nobody. Nobody had come into the door. We called the man of the house, Redmond. He came into the room, saw the bed, and told us to push it back and get into bed. He thought all the time one of us was playing a trick on the other. I said I wouldn't stay in the other bed by myself, so I got in with the others. We put out the light again, and it had only been a couple of minutes when the bed ran out on the floor with the three of us. Richard struck a match again, and this time we all got up and put on our clothes. We had got a terrible fright and couldn't stick it any longer. We told the man of the house we would sit up in the room till daylight. During the time we were sitting in the room, we could hear footsteps leaving the kitchen and coming up the stairs. It would stop on the landing outside the door, and wouldn't come into the room. The footsteps, noises continued throughout the house until daybreak. The next night, the footsteps and noises were continued, but the unfortunate men did not experience any other annoyance. On the following day, the men went home, and it is to be hoped that they were able to make up for all the sleep they'd lost on the 2 previous nights. They returned on Sunday, and from that night till they finally left the house, the men were disturbed practically every night. On Monday, the 11th of July, the bed was continually running out from the wall with its 3 occupants. They kept the lamp alight, and a chair was seen to dance gaily out into the middle of the room. On the following Thursday, we read of the same happenings, with the addition that one of the boarders was lifted out of the bed, though he felt no hand near him. It seems strange that they should have gone through such a bad night exactly a week from the night the poltergeist started its operations. So the account goes on. Every night that they slept in the room, the hauntings continued, some nights being worse than others. On Friday, 29th July, the bed turned up on one side and threw us out on the floor. And before we were thrown out, the pillow was taken from under my head 3 times. When the bed rose up, it fell back without making... Go sit down. You're in trouble. Yeah, you are. Lay down. Hurry up. Find your spot. Help, you want to be on camera? They can't see you. Hang on, she's right here. See, here, there she is. She makes a rare appearance. She hates cameras. She hates cameras. Spooky stories, that's what it is. Spooky stories. Go lay down. Go lay in your spot. On Friday, 29th July, the bed turned up on one side and threw us out on the floor. And before we were thrown out, the pillow was taken from under my head 3 times. When the bed rose up, it fell back without making any noise. This bed was so heavy, it took both the women and the girls to pull it out from the wall without anybody in it. And then there were only 3 casters on it. The poltergeist must have been an insistent fellow, for when the unfortunate men took refuge in the other bed, they had not been long in it before it began to rise, but could not get out of the recess. It was in, and thus it was taken to pieces. It kept very bad, we read, for the next few nights. So Mr. Murphy from the Guardian office and another man named Devereaux came and stopped in the room one night. The experience of Murphy and Devereaux on this night are contained in a further statement, signed by Murphy and corroborated by Devereaux. They seem to have gone to work in a businesslike manner, as before, taking their positions for the night. They made a complete investigation of the bedroom and house, so as to eliminate all chance of trickery or fraud. By this time, it should be noted, one of Mrs. Redmond's lodgers had evidently suffered enough from the poltergeist, as only 2 men are mentioned in Murphy's statement, one sleeping in each bed. The 2 investigators took up their position against the wall midway between the 2 beds, so that they had a full view of the room and the occupants on the beds. That night, says Murphy, was clear, starlight night. No blind obstructed the view from the house or the outside, and Wood could see the outlines of the beds and their occupants clearly. At about 11:30, a tapping was heard close at the foot of the Randall's bed. My companion remarked that it appeared to be like the noise of a rat eating a timber. Sinnott explained, "You soon see the rat it is." The tapping went on slowly at first, then the speed gradually increased to about 100 or 120 per minute, the noise growing louder. This continued for about 5 minutes, when it stopped suddenly. Randall then spoke. He said, "The clothes are slipping off my bed. Look at them sliding off. Good God, they are going off me." Mr. Devereaux immediately struck a match, which he had ready in his hand. The bedclothes had partly left the boy's bed, having gone diagonally towards the foot, going out at the left corner. And not alone did they seem to be drawn off the bed, but they appeared to be actually going back under the bed, much in the same position one would expect bedclothes to be if a strong breeze were blowing through the room at the time. But then everything was perfectly calm. A search was then made for wires or strings, but nothing of the sort could be found. The bedclothes were put back and the light extinguished. For 10 minutes, silence reigned, only to be broken by more rapping, which was followed by shouts from Randall. He was told to hold on to the clothes, which were sliding off again, but this was of little use, for he was heard to cry, I'm going, I'm going, I'm gone. And when the light was struck, he was seen to slide from the bed and all the bedclothes with him. Randall, who was Sinet, Randall, who, with Sinet, had shown considerable strength of mind by staying in the house under such trying circumstances, had evidently had enough of ghostly hauntings, for as he lay on the floor, trembling in every limb, and bathed in perspiration, he exclaimed, Oh, isn't this dreadful? I can't stand it. I can't stay here any longer. He was eventually persuaded to get back to bed. Later on, more rapping occurred in a different part of the room, but it soon stopped, and the rest of the night passed away in peace. Randall and Sinnott went to their homes the next day, and Mr. Murphy spent from 11 till long past midnight in their vacated room, but heard and saw nothing unusual. He states in conclusion that Randall could not reach that part of the floor from which the rapping came on any occasion without attracting my attention and that of my comrade. The next case, related by Professor Barrett, occurred in County Fermanagh, at a spot 11 miles from Enniskillen. I can't speak Irish. At about 2 miles from the hamlet, here we go, of Derrigonelli, where there dwelt a farmer and his family of 4 girls and a boy, of whom the eldest was a girl of about 20 years of age named Maggie. His cottage consisted of 3 rooms, the kitchen, or dwelling room, being in the center, with a room on each side used as bedrooms. In one of these 2 rooms, Maggie slept with her sisters, and it was here that the disturbances occurred. Generally, after they had all gone to bed, when rappings and scratchings were heard, which often lasted all night. Rats were first blamed, but when things were moved by some unseen agent, and boots and candles thrown out of the house, it was seen that something more than the ordinary rat was at work. The old farmer, who was a Methodist, sought advice from his class leader, and, by his directions, laid open a Bible on the bed in the haunted room, placing a big stone on the book. But the stone was lifted off by an unseen hand. The Bible moved out of the room, and 17 pages torn out of it. They could not keep a lamp or candle in the house, so they went to their neighbors for help. And, to quote the old farmer's words to Professor Barrett, Jack Flanagan came and lent us a lamp, saying the devil himself would not steal it, as he had gone to the priest to sprinkle it with holy water. But that, the old man said, did us no good either, for the next day it took away that lamp also. Professor Barrett, at the invitation of Mr. Thomas Plunkett of Enniskillen, went to investigate. He got a full account from the farmer of the freakish tricks which were continually being played in the house, and gives a graphic account of what he himself observed. After the children, except the boy, had gone to bed, Maggie lay down on the bed without undressing, so that her hands and feet could be observed. The rest of us sat round the kitchen fire, when faint raps, rapidly increasing in loudness, were heard coming apparently from the walls, the ceiling, and the various parts of the inner room, the door of which was open. On entering the bedroom with a light, the noises at first ceased, but recommenced when I put the light on the windowsill in the kitchen. I had the boy and his father by my side, and asked Mr. Plunkett to look round the house outside. Standing in the doorway leading to the bedroom, the noises recommenced. The light was gradually brought nearer, and after much patience, I was able to bring the light into the bedroom, whilst the disturbances were still loudly going on. At last, I was able to go up to the side of the bed, with a lighted candle in my hand, and closely observed each of the occupants lying on the bed. The younger children were apparently asleep, and Maggie was motionless nevertheless. Knocks were going on everywhere around, on the chairs, the bedstead, the walls, the ceiling. The closest scrutiny failed to detect any movement on the part of those present that could account for the noises, which were accompanied by a scratching or tearing sound. Suddenly, a large pebble fell in my presence onto the bed. No one had moved to dislodge it, even if it had been placed for that purpose. When I replaced the candle on the windowsill in the kitchen, the knocks became still louder, like those made by a heavy carpenter's hammer, driving nails into the flooring. A couple of days afterwards, the Reverend Maxwell Close, M.A., a well-known member of the SPR, joined Professor Barrett and Mr. Plunkett, and together the party of three paid visits on two consecutive nights to the haunted farmhouse, and the noises were repeated. A complete search was made, both inside and out of the house, but no cause could be found. When the party was leaving, the old farmer was much more perturbed that they had not laid the ghost. When questioned, he said he thought it was fairies. He was asked if it had answered to the questions by raps, and he said he had. But it tells lies as often as truth, and oftener, I think. We tried it, and it only knocked at LMN when we said the alphabet over. Professor Barrett then tested it by asking mentally for a certain number of raps, and immediately the actual number was heard. He repeated this 4 times with a different number each time, and with the same result. Perhaps the most interesting part of this particular case is at the end of Professor Barrett's account, when at the request of the old farmer, Mr. Maxwell Close read some passages from Scripture, followed by the Lord's Prayer, to an accompaniment of the knockings and scratches, which were at first so loud that the solemn words could hardly be heard, but which gradually ceased as they all knelt in prayer. And since that night, no further disturbance occurred. Another similar story comes from the north of Ireland in the year 1866, as recorded in the Larney Reporter of March 31st in that year. 2 families residing at Upper Ballygowan, near Larney, suffered a series of annoyances from having stones thrown into their houses, both by night and by day. Their neighbors came in great numbers to sympathize with them in their affliction, and on one occasion, after a volley of stones had been poured into the house through the window, a young man who was present fired a musket in the direction of the mysterious assailants. The reply was a loud peal of satanic laughter, followed by a volley of stones and turf. On another occasion, a heap of potatoes, which was in an inner apartment and one of the houses, was seen to be in the commotion, and shortly afterwards its contents were hurled into the kitchen, where the inmates of the house, with some of their neighbors, were assembled. The explanation given by some people of this mysterious affair was as mysterious as the affair itself. It was said that many years before the occurrences which we have now related took place, the farmer, who then occupied the premises in which they happened, was greatly annoyed by mischievous tricks that were played on him by a company of fairies, who had a habit of holding their rendezvous in the house. The consequence was that this man had to leave the house, which for a long time stood a roofless ruin. After the lapse of many years, and when the story about the dilapidated fabric having been haunted had probably been forgotten, the people who then occupied the adjoining lands unfortunately took some of the stones of the old deserted mansion to repair their own buildings. At this, the fairies, or good people, were much incensed, and they vented their displeasure on the offender in the only way described. A correspondent from County Wexford, who desires to have his name suppressed, writes as follows: less than 10 miles from the town of blank blank County, Wexford, lives a small farmer named M. blank blank, who by dint of thrift and industry has reared a large family decently and comfortably. Some 20 years ago, Mr. M., through the death of a relative, fell in for a legacy of about £100. As he was already in rather prosperous circumstances, and as his old thatched dwelling house was not large enough to accommodate his increasing family, he resolved to spend the money in building a new one. Not long afterwards, building operations commenced, and in about a year he had a fine slated cottage or a small farmhouse erected and ready for occupation. So far very well, but it is little our friend M. anticipated the troubles which were still ahead of him. He purchased some new furniture at the nearest town, and on a certain day he removed all the furniture which the old house contained into the new one. And in the evening the family found themselves installed in the latter for good, as they thought. They all retired to rest at their usual hour. Scarcely were they snugly settled in bed when they heard peculiar noises inside the house. As time passed, the din became terrible. There was shuffling of feet, slamming of doors, pulling about of furniture, and so forth. The man of the house got up to explore, but could see nothing. Neither was anything disturbed. The door was securely locked as he had left it, After a thorough investigation in which his wife assisted, he had to own he could find no clue to the cause of the disturbance. The couple went to bed again, and almost immediately the racket recommenced and continued more or less till dawn. The dog is breathing behind me. I just stopped. The inmates were puzzled and frightened. See, even the ghost hunter gets scared sometimes. The inmates were puzzled and frightened, but determined to try whether the noise would be repeated the next night before telling their neighbors what had happened. But the pandemonium experienced the first night of their occupation was as nothing compared with what had to endure the second night, and for several succeeding nights. Sleep was impossible, and finally Mr. M and family in terror abandoned their new home and retook possession of their old one. This is the state of things to this day. The old house has been repaired and is tenanted. The new house, a few porches off, facing the public road, is used as a storehouse. The writer has seen it scores of times, and its story is well known all over the countryside. Mr. M is disinclined to discuss the matter or to answer questions, but it is said he made several subsequent attempts to occupy the house, but always failed to stand his ground when night came with its usual rowdy disturbances. It is said that when building operations were about to begin, a little man of bizarre appearance accosted Mr. M and exhorted him to build a different site. Otherwise, the consequences would be unpleasant for him and his wife, While the local peasantry alleged that the house was built across a fairy pathway between two raths, and that was why the cause of the trouble. It is quite true that there are two large raths in the vicinity, and the haunted house is directly in a beeline between them. For myself, I offer no explanation, but I guarantee the substantial accuracy of what I've stated above. Professor Barrett, in the paper to which we have already referred, draws certain conclusions from his study of the subject. One of the chief of these is that the widespread belief in fairies, pixies, gnomes, brownies, etc., probably rests on the very manifestations of poltergeists. The popular explanation of the above story bears out this conclusion, and it is further emphasized by the following, which comes from Portlington. A man near that town had saved £500 and determined to build a house with the money. He fixed on a certain spot and began to build, very much against the advice of his friends, who said it was on a fairy path and would bring him ill luck. Soon the house was finished, and the owner moved in, but the very first night his troubles began. For some unseen hand threw the furniture about and broke it, while the man himself was injured. Being unwilling to lose the value of his money, he tried to make the best of things, but night after night the disturbances continued, and life in the house was impossible. The owner chose the better part of valor and left. No tenant has been found since, and the house stands empty, a silent testimony to the power of the poltergeist. Poltergeist phenomena, from their very nature, lend themselves to spurious reproduction and imitation, as witness the famous case of Cock Lane and many other similar stories. At least one well-known case occurred in Ireland, and is interesting as showing that where fraud is at work, close investigation will discover it. It is related to an old Royal Irish constabulary pensioner who obtained a post as emergency man during the land troubles, and who in 1892 was in charge of an evicted farm in the Passage East district. He was being continually disturbed by furniture and crockery being thrown about in a mysterious manner. Reports were brought to the police, and they investigated the matter, but nothing was heard or seen beyond knocking on an inside wall of a bedroom in which one of the sons was sleeping. This knocking ceased when the police were in the bedroom, and no search was made in the boy's bed to see if he had a stick. The police, therefore, could find no explanation for the noises, and they continued night after night, and eventually the family left and went to live in Waterford. A great furor was raised when it was learned that the hauntings had followed them, and again investigation was made, but it seems to have been more careful this time. An eye was kept on the movements of the young son, and at least 2 independent witnesses saw him throwing things about, fire irons and jam posts, when he thought his father wasn't looking. It seems to have been a plot between the mother and son, owing to the former's dislike to her husband's occupation, which entailed a great unpopularity and considerable personal risk. Fearing for her own and her family's safety, the wife conceived of this plan to force her husband to give up his post. Her efforts were successful, as the man soon resigned his position and went to live elsewhere. Nice. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 5, Haunted Places. Having a good time tonight? Spooky. At least the dog finally went to sleep. She kind of scared me. She kind of freaked me out there for a second. Okay, the houses are haunted, and apparitions frequently seen therein are pretty well established facts. The preceding chapters have dealt with this aspect of the subject, and in view of the weight of evidence to prove the truth of the stories told in them, it would be hard for anyone to doubt that there is such a thing as a haunted house, whatever explanation may be given of haunting. We now turn to another division of the subject, the outdoor ghost who haunts the roadways, country lanes, and other places. Skeptics on the ghostly phenomena are generally pretty full of explanations when they are told of a ghost having been seen in a particular spot, and the teller may be put down as hyper-imaginative, or as having been deluded by moonlight playing through the trees, while cases are not wanting where a reputation for temperance has been lost by a man telling his experiences of a ghost he happens to have met along some country lane, and the fact that there are cases where an imaginative and nervous person has mistaken for a ghost, a white goat, or a sheet hanging from a bush only strengthens the skeptic's belief and makes him blind to the very large weight of evidence that can be arrayed against him. Someday, no doubt, psychologists and scientists will be able to give us a complete and satisfactory explanation of those abnormal apparitions. But at present, we're very much in the dark, and any explanation that might be put forward is necessarily of a tentative nature. The following story is set by Mr. J.J. Crowley of the Munster and Leinster Bank, who writes as follows. The scene is outside Clonmel, on the main road leading up to a nice old residence on the side of the mountains called blah blah lodge. Blank blank lodge. I happened to be visiting my friends, 2 other bankmen. It was night, about 8 o'clock, moonless, and taut and very dark, and well within a quarter of a mile, or perhaps less, of a bridge over a small stream near the house. I saw a girl, dressed in white, wearing a black sash and long flowing hair, walk in the direction from me up the culvert of the bridge and disappear down the other side. At the time I saw it, I thought it most peculiar that I could distinguish a figure so far away, and thought a light of some sort must be falling on the girl, or that there were some people about, and that some of them had struck a match. When I got to the place, I looked about, but could find no person there. I related this story to my friends some time after arriving, and was then told that one of them had wakened up in his sleep a few nights previously, and had seen an identical figure standing at the foot of his bed, and rushed in fright from his room, taking refuge for the night with the other lodger. They told the story to their landlady, and learned from her that this apparition had frequently been seen about the place, and was the spirit of one of her daughters, who had died years previously, rather young, and who, previous to her death, had gone about just as we described the figure we had seen. I had heard nothing of this story until after I had seen the ghost, and consequently it could not be put down to hallucination or over-imagination on my part. The experiences of the 2 constables of the Royal Irish Constabulary were on dispatch duty one winter's night in the early 80s has been sent to us by one of the men concerned, and provides interesting reading. It was a fine moonlight night, with a touch of frost in the air, when these 2 men set out to march the 5 miles to the next barrack. Brisk walking soon brought them near their destination. The barrack, which they were approaching, was on the left side of the road, and facing it on the other side was a whitethorn hedge. The road at this point was wide, and as the 2 constables got within 50 yards of the barrack, they saw a policeman step out from this hedge and move across the road, looking towards the 2 men as he did so. He was plainly visible to them both. He was bareheaded, runs the account, with his tunic open down the front. A stout-built man, black-haired, pale, full face, and short mutton-chop whiskers. They thought he was a newly joined constable who was doing guard and had come out to get some fresh air. while waiting for the patrol to return. As the two men approached, he disappeared into the shadow of the barrack and apparently went in by the door. To their amazement, when they came up, they found the door closed and bolted, and it was only after loud knocking that they got a sleepy, all right, from someone inside. And after the usual challenging were admitted. There was no sign of the strange policeman when they got in, and, on inquiry, they learned that no new constable had joined the station. The two men realized that they had seen a ghost, but refrained from saying anything about it to the men at the station, a very sensible precaution, considering the loneliness of the average policeman's life in this country. Some years afterwards, the narrator of the above story learned that a policeman had been lost in a snowdrift near this particular barrack. Whether this be the explanation, we leave to others. The facts stated are well vouched for. There is no evidence to support the theory of hallucination, for the apparition was so vivid that the idea of its being other than normal never entered the constables' heads, till they had gotten to the barrack. When they found the door shut and bolted, to their amazement, they found it caused by imagination against an apparently unsociable or thoughtless comrade, and it was only afterwards, while discussing the whole thing on their homeward journey, that it occurred to them that it would have been impossible for any ordinary mortal to shut, bolt, and bar a door without making a sound. In the winter of 1840-41, in the days when snow and ice and all their attendant pleasures were most often in evidence, in these degenerate days, a skating party was enjoying itself on the pond in the grounds of the castle near Rathfarnham, County, Dublin. Among the skaters was a man who had with him a very fine curly-coated retriever dog. The pond was thronged with people enjoying themselves, when suddenly the ice gave way beneath him, and the man fell into the water. The dog went to his rescue, and both were drowned. A monument was erected to perpetuate the memory of the dog's heroic self-sacrifice, but only the pedestal now remains. The ghost of the dog is said to haunt the grounds and the public road between the castle gate and the Dodder Bridge. Many people have seen the phantom dog, and the story is well known locally. The ghost of a boy who was unalived by a Romney is said to haunt one of the lodge gates of the castle. Castle Dempsey. And the lodgekeeper states that he saw it only a short time ago. The castle, however, is now in possession of the Jesuit fathers, and the superior assures us that there has been no sign of a ghost for a long time. His explanation being that the place is so crowded out with new buildings that even a ghost would have some difficulty in finding a comfortable corner. It is a fairly general belief among students of supernatural phenomenon that animals have the psychic faculty to develop to a greater extent than we have. There are numerous stories which tell of animals being scared and frightened by something that's invisible to a human being. And the explanation given is that the animal has seen a ghost, which we can't see. A story that is told of a certain spot near the village of G. in County Kilkenny supports this theory. The account was sent to us by the eyewitness of what occurred, and runs as follows. I was out for a walk one evening near the town of G. about 8:45 p.m. and was crossing the bridge that leads to the Escarlo district with a small wire-haired terrier dog. When we were about 3/4 of a mile out, the dog began to bark and yelp in a most vicious manner at nothing on the left-hand side of the roadway, near to a straggling hedge. I felt a bit creepy, and that something was wrong. The dog kept on barking, but I could at first see nothing. But on looking closely for a few seconds, I believe I saw a small gray-white object vanish gradually and noiselessly into the hedge. No sooner had it vanished than the dog ceased barking, wagged his tail, and seemed pleased with his successful efforts. The narrator goes on to say that he made inquiries when he got home and found that this spot on the road had a very bad reputation, as people had frequently seen a ghost there, while horses had often to be beaten, coaxed, or led past the place. The explanation locally current is that an unalive victim, how can I say this? A victim who unalived himself was buried at the crossroads near at hand. or that it may be the ghost of a man who is known to have been killed at the spot. The following story has been sent to us by the Reverend H.R.B. Gillespie, to whom it was told by one of the witnesses of the incident described therein. One bright moonlight night, some time ago, a party consisting of a man, his 2 daughters, and a friend were driving along a country road in County Leitrim. They came to a steep hill, and all except the driver got down to walk. One of the 2 sisters walked in the front, and after her came the other 2, followed closely by the trap. They had not gone far when those in the rear saw a shabbily dressed man walking beside the girl who was leading. But she didn't seem to be taking any notice of him, and, wondering what he could be, they hastened to overtake her. But just when they were catching her up, the figure suddenly dashed in the shadow of a disused forge, which stood by the side of the road, and as it did so, the horse, which up to this had been perfectly quiet, reared up and became unmanageable. The girl beside whom the figure had walked had seen and heard nothing. The road was not bordered by trees or a high hedge, so that it could not have been some trick on the moonlight. One of the girls described the appearance of the figure to a local workman, who said, "It is very like a tinker who was found dead in that forge about 6 months ago." Here is another story of a haunted spot on a road where a ghost was seen, not at the witching hour at night, but when the evening shadows lengthened, but in broad daylight. It is sent to us by the recipient, a lady who does not desire to have her name mentioned. She was walking along a county road in the vicinity of Cork one afternoon, and passed various people. She then saw coming towards her a countrywoman dressed in an old-fashioned style. This figure approached her, and when it drew near, suddenly staggered, as if under the influence of drink, and disappeared. She hastened to the spot, but searched in vain for any clue to the mystery. The road was bounded by high walls, and there was no gateway or gap through which the figure might slip. Much mystified, she continued on her way, and arrived at her destination. She there mentioned what had occurred, and was then informed by an old resident in the neighborhood that that woman had constantly been seen up to 20 years before, but not since that date. By the country people, the road was believed to be haunted, but the recipient did not know this at the time. The following is sent to us by Mr. T.J. Westrope, and has points of its own which are interesting. He states, on the road from Bray to Wingates, at the Deer Park of Kilreddy, is a spot which, whatever be the explanation, is distinguished by weird sounds, and some say sights. I, on one occasion, was walking with a friend to catch the train at Bray about 11 o'clock one evening, some 25 years ago, when we both heard heavy steps and rustling of bracken in the Deer Park. Apparently, someone got over the gate, crossed the road with heavy steps, and fell from the wall next Brayhead, rustling and slightly groaning. The night was lightsome, though without actual moonlight, and we could see nothing over the wall where we had heard the noise. For several years after, I dismissed the matter as a delusion, but when I told the story to some cousins, they said that another relative, now a fellow of Trinity College, Dublin, had heard it too, and that there was a local belief that it was the ghost of a poacher mortally wounded by gamekeepers who had escaped across the road and died beyond it. Mr. Restrup afterwards got the relative mentioned above to tell his experience, and it corresponded with his own, except that the ghost was visible. The clergyman, who was rector of the Greystones at the time, used to say that he had heard exactly similar noises, though he had seen nothing. The following story of an occurrence near Dublin is sent to us by a lady who was a very firm believer in ghosts. On a fine night some years ago, 2 sisters were returning home from the theater. They were walking along a very lonely part of the Cambridge Road, about 2 miles beyond the tram terminus, and were chatting gaily as they went, when suddenly they heard the clink-clink of a chain coming towards them. At first they thought it was a goat or a donkey which had got loose, and was dragging his chain along the ground. But they could see nothing, and could hear no noise but the clink of the chain. Although the road was clear and straight, nearer and nearer came the noise, gradually getting louder, and as it passed them closely, they distinctly felt a blast or whiff of air. They were paralyzed with an indefinable fear and were scarcely able to drag themselves along the remaining quarter of a mile to their house. The elder of the two was in very bad health, and the other had almost to carry her. Immediately she entered the house, she collapsed and had to be revived with brandy. An old woman, it seems, had been unalived for her savings by a tramp near the spot where this strange occurrence took place. It is thought that there is a connection between the crime and the haunting of this part of the Kimmage Road. Whatever the explanation may be, the whole story bears every evidence of truth, and it would be hard for anyone to disprove it. Churchyards. Churchyards are generally considered to be the hunting ground of all sorts and conditions of ghosts. People who would on other occasions, when the necessity arises, prove themselves to be possessed of at any rate a normal amount of courage, turn pale and shiver at the thought of having to pass through a churchyard at dead of night. It may be some encouragement to such to state that out of a fairly large collection of accounts of haunted places, only one relates to a churchyard. The story is told by Mr. G.H. Miller of Edgeworthstown. During the winter of 1875, he writes, I attended a soiree about 5 miles from here. I was riding, and on my way home about 11:30 p.m., I had to pass by the old ruins and burial ground of Abbey Shule. The road led round by two sides of the churchyard. It was bright moonlight night, and as my girth broke, I was walking the horse quite slowly. As I passed the ruin, I saw what I took to be a policeman in a long overcoat. He was walking from the center of the churchyard towards the corner, and, as far as I could see, would be at the corner by the time I would reach it, and we would meet. Quite suddenly, however, he disappeared, and I could see no trace of him. Soon after, I overtook a man who had left the meeting long before me. I expressed wonder that he had not been farther on, and he explained that he went a roundabout way to avoid passing the old abbey, as he did not want to see the monk. On questioning him, he told me that a monk was often seen in the churchyard. A story told of a ghost which haunts a certain spot on an estate near the city of Waterford bears a certain resemblance to the last story, for the reason that it was only after the encounter had taken place in both cases that it was known that anything out of the ordinary had been seen. In the early 80s of last century, Court near Waterford was occupied by Mr. and Mrs. S. and their family of 2 young boys and a girl of 21 years of age. Below the house is a marshy glen with an open drain cut through it. Late one evening, the daughter was out shooting rabbits near this drain and saw, as she thought, her half-brother standing by the drain in a sailor suit, which, like other small boys, he wore. She called to him once or twice, and to her surprise, got no reply. She went towards him, and when she got close, he suddenly disappeared. The next day, she asked an old dependent, who had lived many years in the place, if there was anything curious about the glen. He replied at once, "Oh, you mean the little sailor man? Sure, he won't do you any harm." This was the first she had heard of anything of the sort, but it was then found that none of the country people would go through the glen after dusk. Some time afterwards, 2 sons of the clergyman in the parish in which Court stands were out one evening fishing in the drain, when one of them suddenly said, "What's that sailor doing there?" The other saw nothing, and presently the figure vanished. At the time of the appearance, neither had heard of Miss Block's experience, and no one has been able to explain it, as there is apparently no tradition of any little sailor man having been there in the flesh. Mr. Joseph McCrossan, a journalist on the staff of the Strabane Chronicle, has sent us a cutting from that paper describing a ghost which appeared to men working in an engine house at Strabane Railway Station on 2 successive nights in October 1913. The article depicts very graphically the antics of the ghost and the fear of the men who saw it. Mr. McCrossan interviewed one of these men, Pinkerton by name, and the story is told in his words as follows. Michael Madden, Fred Alphalet, and I were engaged inside a shed cleaning engines, when at 12:30, which is midnight, a knocking came to all the doors, and continued without interruption, accompanied by unearthly yells. The three of us went to one of the doors and saw, I could swear to it without doubt, the form of a man of heavy build. I thought I was about to faint. My hair stood high on my head. We all squealed for help, when the watchman and signalman came fast to our aid. Armed with a crowbar, the signalman made a dash at the spirit, but was unable to strike down the ghost, which hovered about our shed till 2:30. It was moonlight, and we saw it plainly. There was no imagination on our part. We three cleaners climbed up the engine and hid on the roof of the engine, lying there till the morning at our wits' end. The next night it came at 1:30. Oliphant approached the spirit within 2 yards, but then he collapsed, the ghost uttering terrible yells. I commenced work, but the spirit gazed into my face, and I fell forward against the engine. 7 of us saw the ghost this time. Our clothes and everything in the shed were tossed and thrown about. The other engine cleaners were interviewed and corroborated Pinkerton's account. One of them stated that he saw the ghost run up and down the ladder leading to a water tank and disappear into it, while the signalman described how he struck at the ghost with a crowbar, but the weapon seemed to go right through it. The spirit finally took its departure through the window. The details of this affair are very much on the lines of the good old-fashioned ghost yarns, but it's hard to see how so many men could labor under the same delusion. The suggestion that the whole thing was a practical joke may also be dismissed, for if the apparition had flesh and bones, the crowbar would have soon proved it. The story goes that a man was unalive near the spot some time ago. Whether there is any connection between this crime and the apparition, it would be hard to say. However, we're not concerned with explanations, for who as yet can explain the supernatural? The facts as stated have all the appearance of the truth. All right, guys. Try to read through one more and then call it a day, okay? Mr. Patrick Ryan, a Peak County Limerick, gives us 2 stories as he heard them related by Mr. Michael O'Dwyer of the same place. The former is evidently a very strong believer in supernatural phenomena, but he realizes how strong is the unbelief of many, and in support of his stories, he gives names of several persons who will vouch for the truth of them. With a few alterations, we give you the story in his own words. Mr. O'Dwyer has related how one night, after he had carried the mails to the train, he went with some fodder for a heifer in a field close to the railway station, near to which was a creamery. He discovered the animal grazing near the creamery, although how she came to be there was a mystery. As a broad trench separated it from the rest of the field, which is only spanned by a plank used by pedestrians when crossing the field. Perhaps, he said in explanation, it was that he should go there to hear. It was about 11:45, midnight, and, having searched the field in vain, he was returning home when, as he crossed the plank, he espied the heifer browsing peacefully in the aforementioned part of the field which was near the creamery. He gave her the fodder, and, heavens, was he suffering from delusions? Surely his ears were not deceiving him. From the creamery funnel there arose a dense volume of smoke, mingled with the sharp hissing of steam and the rattling of cans, all as if the creamery were still working, and it were broad daylight. His heifer became startled and bellowed frantically. O'Dwyer, himself a man of nerves, yet possessing all the superstitions of the Celt, was startled and ran without ceasing to his home near by, where he went quickly to bed. O'Dwyer is not the only one who has seen this, as I have been told by several of my friends how they heard it. Who knows the mystery surrounding this affair? The second story relates to a certain railway station in the south of Ireland. Again, we use Mr. Ryan's own words. A near relative of mine, he writes, once had occasion to go to the mail train to meet with a friend. While sitting talking to O'Dwyer, whom he met on the platform, he heard talking going on in the waiting room. O'Dwyer heard it also, and they went to the door, but saw nothing save for the light of a waning moon, which filtered into the window. Uncertain, they struck matches, but saw nothing. Again they sat outside, and again they heard the talking. And this time they did not go to look, for they knew about it. In the memory of the writer, a certain unfortunate person had unalived himself on the railway, and was carried to the waiting room pending an inquest. He lay all night there till the inquest was held next day. Let us not look further into the matter, said O'Dwyer, and my relative, having acquiesced, he breathed the shuddering prayer for the repose of the dead. I'll do one more story, you guys. The following story, which has been sent as a personal experience by Mr. William Mackey of Strabane, is similar in many ways to an extraordinary case of retrocognitive vision, which occurred some years ago to two English ladies which were paying a visit to Versailles, and who published their experiences in a book entitled An Adventure. I read that. That's a famous ghost thing for Versailles. Mr. Mackey writes, it was during the severe winter of the Crimean War, when indulging in my favorite sport of wildfowl shooting, that I witnessed the following strange scene. It was a bitterly cold night towards the end of November, or beginning of December. The silvery moon had sunk in the west shortly before midnight. The sport had been all that could be desired, when I began to realize that the blood was frozen in my veins, and I was behind me, on the point of starting for home, when my attention was drawn to the barking of a dog close by, which was followed in a few seconds by the loud report of a musket, the echo of which had scarcely died away in the silent night, when several musket shots went off in quick succession. This seemed to be the signal for a regular fusillade of musketry, and it was quite evident from the nature of the firing that there was attack and defense. For the life of me, I could not understand what it all meant. Not being superstitious, I did not for a moment imagine it was supernatural. Notwithstanding that, my courageous dog was crouching in abject terror between my legs. Beads of perspiration began to trickle down from my forehead, when suddenly there arose a flame as if a house were on fire. But I knew from the position of the blaze, which was only a few hundred yards from where I stood, that there was no house there, or any combustible that would burn. And what perplexed me most was to see pieces of burning thatch and timber sparks fall hissing into the water at my feet. When the fire seemed at its height, the firing appeared to weaken, and when the clear sound of a bugle floated out in the midnight air, it suddenly ceased, and I could hear distinctly the sound of cavalry coming at a canter, their accoutrements jingling quite plainly on in the frosty air. In a very short time they arrived at the scene of the fight. I thought it an eternity until they took their departure, which they did at the walk. It is needless to say that although the scene of this tumult was on my nearest way home, I did not venture that way, as, although there are many people who would say that I never knew what fear was, I must confess on this occasion I was thoroughly frightened. At breakfast I got a good sound rating from my father for staying out so late. My excuse was that I fell asleep and had a horrible dream, which I related. When I finished, I was told I had been dreaming with my eyes open, that I was not the first person who had witnessed this strange sight. He then told me the following narrative. It was towards the end of the 17th century that a widow named Sally Mackey and her 3 sons lived on the outskirts of the little settlement of the Mackeys. A warrant was issued by the government against the 3 sons for high treason, the warrant being delivered for execution to the officer in command of the infantry regiment stationed at Lifford. A company was told off for the purpose of effecting the arrest, and the troops set out from Lifford at 11 p.m. The cottage, home of the Mackeys, was approached by a bridle path leading from the main road to Derry, which only permitted the military to approach in single file. They arrived there at midnight, and the first intimation the inmates had of danger was the barking and then the shooting of the collie dog. Possessing, as they did, several stand of arms, they opened fire on the soldiers as they came in view and killed and wounded several. It was the mother, Sally Mackey, who did the shooting, the sons loading the muskets. Whether the cottage went on fire by accident or design was never known. It was only when the firing from the cottage ceased and the door was forced open that the officer in command rushed in and brought out the prostrate form of the lady, who was severely wounded and burned. All the sons perished, but the soldiers suffered severely, a good many being killed and wounded. The firing was heard by the sentries at Lifford, and a troop of cavalry was dispatched to the scene of conflict, but only arrived in time to see the heroine dragged from the burning cottage. She had not, however, been fatally wounded, and lived for many years afterwards with a kinsman. My father remembered conversing with old men when he was a boy, who remembered her well. She seemed to take a delight in narrating incidents of the fight to those who came to visit her, and would always finish up by making them feel the pellets between the skin and her ribs. And that is it for Chapter 6. So, that's going to do it for tonight, guys. So, I'll be back next Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific to read some more. Like I said, I'm not doing any extra readings tonight. The weather is doing weird things. I can hear the wind howling outside. So, yeah, I'll make those up to people. But I want to thank you guys. We got some shows scheduled for next week. They're going to be later on in the week, Thursday, Friday. So as soon as those come up, I will let everybody know what they are, who's going to be on, and all that good stuff. I want to relate a quick story that's kind of related to one of these stories in this book, in that there's a place out here in Woodland called the Woodland Opera House. And, okay, he's gone. Thank you. Called the Woodland Opera House. It's okay, Kathy. And got the chance to investigate there several times. The first time I went in there filming. I used to film a show for public access out here called California Haunts, which is where the name came from, where I filmed another paranormal team before I formed my own team. And we went there. That was the first investigation I did with them. And we went there, and we were upstairs on the second floor balcony area. And there's a little area, well, I forget what you call it, but there's a little area where you can go use the restroom and everything off the side. And there's a Polish opera singer that supposedly haunts the building. And so we were up there, and I was filming, and at the same time, I was snapping photos, and we had some interesting stuff happen. We were up there. The psychic that was there put a shawl on that could have belonged to this woman from the 1800s. And so she says, well, take a picture here, and I took the picture, and I got like white blotches in front of her face. But that's not what connects to this book. What connects to this book is the fact that there were 5 of us up there, 5 or 6 of us up there, two psychics, and then, just my film crew and a couple others from their team. And all of a sudden we hear something fall and hit the floor while we're talking to this alleged ghost. And I look down, and it's a pearl from like a pearl necklace. Just a single pearl. It hit the floor and rolled towards me. It was really cool. So that that happened, and we have no explanation for it. I mean, we're looking up at the ceiling, going, "Well, is there something up there that might be a fake pearl necklace or something?" There was nothing up on the ceiling or anything. It just came down and rolled towards me. So I just wanted to share that. That reminded me of when they were talking. When they were talking about the pebbles being thrown in or coming down from the ceiling. So it was similar to that. Okay. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow on. Excuse me. I'll be back tomorrow on the Clock app, and I'll be doing free tarot card readings, past, present, future, 7 p.m. Pacific. Okay? And thank you so much for coming tonight. And again, I'll let you guys know next week, mid-next week, who's going to be on the last 2 days of the week. And start getting stuff booked. I got like 5 people lined up who are probably going to go the week after next, and we're going to start rolling with my regular radio show as well as things get going. And I'll be starting a lot website. I already have the website pretty much done to do private readings too. So you guys that want some private readings, as far as tarot cards go and all that, I'll be doing that too. Okay? All right, guys. I will see you guys tomorrow. Join me over on TikTok, California Haunts. We're California Haunts on TikTok, just like we are California Haunts Radio everywhere else. Okay? All right. You guys over here in these 2 apps, just sit tight for a second. Let me sign off over here. So thank you guys very much, and I'll see you next. If I don't see you over on TikTok, I'll see you next week sometime for the California Haunts Radio Show. Okay, that was slow. All right.